Okay, so welcome to the World Species Congress, which is the first ever species congress organized by Reverse the Red and IUCN. To celebrate this, we are organizing a series of species-focused panel discussion, and the theme of these events are Beyond Talk, transforming ideas into impactful local interventions. So who are we? We are from the course Wetland Ecology, Biodiversity and Conservation, a 6 months course given by IUCN SSC Freshwater Conservation Committee and the Fishing Cat Project, which is the longest running research and conservation program on the fishing cat in the world. So today the spotlight is on the gharial. We are all gathered here to contribute to gharial conservation in India. In today's discussion, we hope to answer an important question. Can citizen sentinels help curb environmental crimes? More specifically, can citizen sentinels help curb illegal sand mining? So welcome again, and I am Tyasha Adhya, the co-founder of the Fishing Cat Project, and as well as the co-founder of the course Wetland Ecology, Biodiversity and Conservation. Divyanshu, over to you. Can you
Myself,
introduce yourself?
Divyanshu Pawar. I'm the participant of course Wetland Ecology, Biodiversity and Conservation. So I would like to introduce our lead panelist, Mr. Tarun Nair. Tarun is a conservation biologist with an affiliate with an affinity for crocodilians and rivers. He is head of the Program Makara at the Wildlife Conservation Trust. His work has largely focused on understanding the conservation needs of gharials in the northern and central India, particularly along the Chambal, Son, and Gandak Rivers. He is also interested in human-wildlife interactions, conservation philosophy, policy, and the human impact on wildlife and ecosystems. Our next panelist, Mr. Sahil Zuchi. Sahil Zuchi is a conservation writer, naturalist, wildlife photographer, and an activist. He been involved with environmental consulting in the UK and Spain. Sahil has covered important environmental and wildlife issues in the country, and his work has been featured in the leading wildlife and photography magazines. Our next panelist, Mr. Kunal Jain. Kunal is originally from Agra. However, coming from background in finance and accounting, he couldn't stay away from outdoors and nature for long. So he quit his corporate standing and returned to India to create his own travel firm known as Travel With. His company has been rated in the top 5% of outdoor activities on the TripAdvisor and has received the Travel Choice Award in 2020, 2021, and following 2023 as well, which is a huge accomplishment for him. Kunal has also been organizing river safaris on the Chambal for the past 6 years. Our next panelist, Mr. Siddharth Agarwal. Over the past 7 years, Siddharth has walked over 6,000 kilometers across India, along the rivers and across them. He has designed and led all the Veditham's projects since inception. One of them is the open data project known as the India Sandwatch ISW, which focuses on the issues of river sand mining in India. Siddharth is also a steering committee member at the India Rivers Forum. Uh,
Thanks, Divyanshu, and thank you so much for everyone to agree to come here. Um, we could start with probably Tarun, because we talked about gharials, we talked about illegal sand mining. So it seems like gharial ecology is intricately linked with the availability of sandbanks. So I would request Tarun to enlighten us on how on this link and why therefore sand mining is such a huge threat to gharial's existence today.
Yeah, its Latin name Gavialis gangeticus simply translates to the gharial of the Ganga, although the genus name Gavialis is a corruption of the Hindi word gharial. So it's also amongst the world's longest and largest living crocodilians, with adult males having been recorded to be over 6 meters or 20 feet long. And they also have this unusual jaw morphology, extremely slender snout, and they're specialist fish eaters. And although they have been on occasion observed to feed on other prey like turtles and birds. But and they also considered the most aquatic of all crocodilians, leaving water only to bask and to nest. Their legs are extremely weak to allow them to walk on land, and so they resort to sliding on their bellies when they emerge to bask or to nest. And they're also unique in that this is the only species of crocodile that's sexually dimorphic. Adult males possess what is known as a gara at the end of their snouts, and these are sociosexual. They have a sociosexual function because it it apparently um, it appears that males use them in displays with other males during courtship, and they also help uh, to amplify sound because the males exhale air forcefully during the breeding season, and the gara appears to amplify that sound. It's a river-dwelling crocodile, and they favor deeper sections of rivers that typically have large sand deposits uh, next to deep pools. And they're also a very social species. Typically, these sorts of social groups have one or two dominant males at the top of the hierarchy, accompanied by several adult females. And these groups also have subadults and juveniles within these groups. And these sorts of, what do you say, these sorts of stable residencies are often permanent, especially in peninsular rivers like the Chambal. And in these locations, seasonal movements have been recorded, maybe up to 200 kilometers by people who've attached radio transmitters on them and monitored movement over several seasons. And movements also are typically between favored breeding sites and feeding sites, where they go, where they travel downstream, especially in the monsoon. And courtship and mating typically occurs towards the end of winter, around mid-Feb, with adult animals congregating near potential nesting sites. And this is followed by nesting from, say, mid-March to early April. And this is a hole nesting species, so they excavate nests on large sand deposits. And females often excavate trial nests prior to actual nesting, and they lay an average of about 40 eggs. And this is a colonial nesting species, meaning that several females will choose the same nesting site and same sand deposit. And after nesting, the females stick around and guard the nest. And sometime between, say, late May and early June, after about 60, 75 days of incubation, the female will help excavate the nest and allow the hatchlings to emerge and come to the edge of the water. And because all of this appears synchronized, so all the nests, hatchlings emerge around the same time, and they form creches. So these large colonial nesting sites will often have several hundred babies hanging around at the same time. And you'll have several attendant females and adult males guarding these creches for 1 to 2 months. And this is also one of the few documented cases of males participating in hatchling care, in parental care, in crocodilians. So yeah, and these crashes eventually break up with the rising monsoonal floodwaters. And hatchling survival is poor in the first year. So it's expected that 80 to 90% of young animals don't survive past the first year. So yeah, so this is broadly, this is a quick summary of Gharial natural history. The government of India in the late 70s and early 80s, they initiated Project Crocodile, which had two components. One was to collect eggs from the wild, rear them in captivity, and release them at maybe 2 or 3 years once they've reached 120, 150 centimeters. And this was an attempt to address high infant mortality. And so these programs have released close to, say, 10, 12,000 gharials over the last 30 years. And while proponents claim that this has helped avert extinction, many of us are not very sure how effective these programs have been, because after all this, while the species continues to be critically endangered, and no new breeding populations have been established. So all the places, the 5 breeding locations that we have today, are sites that used to have breeding populations before these programs started. So there's almost no evidence that these programs helped recover or establish breeding populations. Over the last few years, especially in the last couple of decades, sand mining has emerged as a big challenge to gharial habitats, because this is especially so in peninsular rivers because of the kind of grain which is found in these rivers, and this is sand that's also considered ideal for construction. And over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, we've seen sand mining become more mechanized and happening at an industrial scale. So earlier, while yes, gharial nesting sites used to be targeted by miners, the scale of operations was still, I think, manageable in the sense that agencies could monitor how many sand loads were being removed, and it was there was some sense of control in being able to regulate the activity. But over the last few years, I think the availability of heavy machinery like backhoe loaders, most commonly known as JCBs and so on, it's just that the easy availability of this sort of machinery has increased both the rate and scale of sand mining across many of these rivers. And we've documented the complete loss of nesting sites in prime gharial habitats, especially in places like the Chambal and Son gharial sanctuaries. And yeah, so this is something that we're trying to deal with at the moment in terms of how to respond to this crisis, because state forest departments seem to be helpless given the scale of the problem. And we all know that there is political backing for this sort of activity, irrespective of which government is in power. Yeah, so that's so that's one of the issues that has emerged, and this is, in some sense, there's almost no administrative will to try and address the scale of the problem. And because these rivers also dammed, we see that there's very little sediment coming down these river systems. So it's a double whammy in that sense, because there's not enough sand to replace what's being taken out every monsoon, and the scale of sand mining, because it's mechanized and there are hundreds of tractors sometimes or trucks being filled at these sorts of locations. And yeah, so we are trying to both monitor the scale of operations and see which sites are most vulnerable, what can be done to address this from a species perspective. And right now we're focusing on one species. We're not even aware of what other organisms are dealing with in terms of nesting habitats, because even species like freshwater turtles and several ground nesting birds require these large sand deposits to nest in, and they're critical breeding habitats. So yeah, we don't even have a good idea, fair sense of what's happening to many of these other species that share these habitats with gharials. Yeah. Yeah, so that's about it for now. And I think it'll be good to hear from the other panelists.
Sure, but thanks Tarun for introducing us to the gharials. It seems so interesting, especially the ghara and
Yes,
its function, in conveying messages, sexually, and also the fact that this particular species has male parental care.
yes,
And at the very inception, gharials need the sand. They need that sand fabric to be there, which seems to
yes.
be uprooted
Mhm.
tremendously. And you also touched upon the threats, therefore, why sand mining is such a threat, and therefore
Mm.
why we need eyes, ears, and voices. So we have one such person with us, Kunal, who has who did decide to kind of use his presence, sorry, Sahil actually, who decided to use his presence and speak out. Sahil, would you want to come in and tell us a little bit about how, what kind of so you basically went to Chambal because you love birds, and like Tarun also touched upon the fact that these sandbanks are also critical breeding grounds for a lot of birds. And then you saw something and that instigated you to write about it. Sahil, would you want to kind of tell us about your experience?
Yeah, sure. So this was in late 2021 and early 2022 when I had visited the sort of Bharatpur area, Dholpur, as well as the area just across the bridge, the Chambal Bridge, which forms the state boundary between Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. I was there for approximately 3.5 weeks. So I had the opportunity to sort of go around a fair bit. What really shocked me once I arrived at the Chambal Bridge was, I would say, the brazen manner in which sand mining was progressing in daylight. And this was literally in the presence of forest officials, the police, from two state departments, of two state governments, sorry. Um, so, in some sense, it really disturbed my birding experience there, I would say. I had gone after the Indian skimmer, obviously, which is endangered. Then you have the black-bellied tern, which is also endangered. And perhaps these sites form one of the best areas to spot them in India. Can easily be spotted during certain months. Uh, what I witnessed was a convoy of approximately 150 to 200 tractors with perhaps 10 JCBs uh, carrying out their mining operation in daylight, in the presence of police officials and forest officials. So I'm aware this is a fairly touchy subject, and I had to be a bit careful while taking photographs or even talking to people. Initially, no one wanted to speak with me, uh, but I sort of kept going back to the area and slowly started to speak to people there. And it was fairly apparent that, as I think Tarun has reported previously in one of his great articles that he's written in the Wire, that this is not something external, that uh, you know an external party has come into the area and started the sand mining operation. It is pretty much the people who reside in those communities, in those areas, who are also involved, and understandably so, for their livelihood. Uh, so it was really difficult to speak to people initially, but however, I just decided to go about my business and try and document whatever I could. Even I think I tried to estimate the amount of sand that was being extracted in terms of cubic foot. I mean, this is a very crude estimate, but it was on a scale that was just really distressing to see. Um, so, having witnessed that just on the main road, I really started to wonder what would be happening in the interior areas. If this is happening, or perhaps it's the case that it was happening because it's close to the main road, and from there, it's very easy to distribute the sand to wherever it needs to go to, as far as the NCR area and further. So on one of the evenings when I had returned after witnessing this, I was fortunate enough to have a few contacts fairly high up in the forest department. And then through a mutual contact who Tarun also knows, who actually put me in touch with Tarun, I had a word with Tarun about what we could possibly do about this. And fortunately, I also knew some editors at a newspaper. So I decided to just, take up the issue and write something powerful.
Thanks, Sahil. Tarun, yes, please. Could you tell us how it impacted on ground?
Yes. So I believe there was an ongoing case in the National Green Tribunal where the three state governments, so the Chambal River and the National Chambal Sanctuary. This is a tri-state sanctuary across Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Uttar Pradesh. And this being the border also makes it difficult for enforcement agencies to track down, say, minors and so on, because it's very easy for them to cross over to the other states, especially in areas where the river is not very deep. So they can take all the tractors and all the other machinery right across if need be. And this is one excuse that administrators use as to why they are unable to keep a tab or control what's happening on the ground. Yeah, so the part because there was this case, ongoing case, and that district administrators, the DC or the magistrate, and the SP and the DFOs of each of these districts, oftentimes they moved around whenever someone takes any action against sand mining. So while we were keeping track of these changes and other news reports on mining, we came across a submission to the National Green Tribunal by the district administration, where they had specifically seen this article by Sahil. This was the article from March 25th in 2022. And soon after this, not soon after, about 10 months later, we see a bunch of documents by the district administration where they've specifically cited this article, and they've shared details of this to other functionaries within the district and to the National Green Tribunal. And there's been a fair bit of follow-up action based on that. So there were site visits, there were several, because this was submitted to court. They wanted to show what the district administration was doing to follow up based on this article. So they've put together details of how many areas they've monitored, how many tractors they've seized, what happened in terms of, so there was some meeting with all three state departments involved. So it just, in some sense, documentation of whatever happened as a follow-up to this article specifically. And on the ground, yes, it did change. We did see changes in terms of how rampant sand mining came to a sudden halt. And this also proves that if the district administration or the state government decides to do something, they can very well put an end to this sort of activity. And every time they feel that there's no one watching or that the court is not coming down heavily down on them, then things get lax in terms of monitoring on the ground and their surveillance and so on. And then this activity is back again. And even recently, Siddharth and team had come to the Chambal to visit some of these mine sites. And because there was a new SP in town, he'd put a halt to all this sand mining that was happening there. And even speaking to locals, they would tell you that this is all because there's a new strict DC in town, and he's decided to enforce the the law. And yeah, so all of these points to or suggests that whenever they get the feeling that there are other people watching and it's being documented, then they are in some sense encouraged to take action and not allow these activities to happen the way that it goes on typically. And yeah, so I think that's a positive to take away from this little episode.
True.
Hey,
And
I
long
have a
live,
question.
yeah, sure. I just wanted to say long live the SP's resolution, resolve to, strictly stop sand mining. Yes, Kunal, you had a question. Sorry.
Is this the reason why there was no sand mining? Is this the article because of which there was no sand mining last year on both MP and Rajasthan sides?
Yes, it did play a big role in that because typically most articles, most reports of sand mining are in local press, and I think it's easy for them to ignore it, especially regional media. And I think this particular article, because it is published in the Hindu and somebody up in the NGT might have seen it. So they pulled up the district authorities and so they had to follow up. So yeah, so it did have that impact on the ground. And this sort of response is atypical because it's very easy for district administrators to ignore these sorts of articles as being written by activists and so on. So, but here, because like Sahil also mentioned, him being an outsider and not having a stake here, yeah, I think that worked in his favor. So it was not easy to dismiss what was seen, and that yeah, so they were forced to respond to it. And because it was an ongoing case, they had to show that the administration is doing something about it. So they went and did a bunch of raids and stopped the activity for a while and so on. Yes.
Yeah, so I think Kunal, if we can come to you as well, because through you, a lot of travelers are coming to Chambal. So when travelers come, how is there a way in which you kind of introduce them to the landscape and also to the threats and what they can do about it? Can we have a discussion about that as well? So Kunal, yes, over to you.
Sure, Tyasa. So the tourists are not in big numbers, right? They don't come in big numbers to the Chambal. It's not something very attractive to see big gharials and crocodiles. How people view the Chambal, they view the Chambal as a place full of dacoits, even now, especially amongst Indians. And then a lot of people want to come there for a picnic. It was very difficult for me that 2019-20 when I saw a lot of tractors converge on the Chambal and they were completely destroying habitats. In fact, a month ago, or when we had when I met you, Tarun, last time in Agra, I'd gone on a boat ride, not with guests, but I'd gone to a place downstream called Tigri Rithora, which I'd gone in 2019 as well, or yeah, before COVID. And there in 2019, I saw probably the highest number of gharials in one specific area. May have been more than 60 individuals, all females. This was in February, so they were probably there huddled up during the mating courtship period. And I went there again a month ago, and there were literally 6 to 7. That's it. So that area has been completely devastated because of sand mining.
Yeah, true. And does this also impact the way the river, is going to probably traverse the landscape and in terms of flood mitigation, etc.? And do we know of traditional ways of harvesting sand sustainably? Yeah. So Tarun, would you want to come in?
If you look at the protected area network in India, it's about 4 to 5% of the total land area. And if 95% of our land is unable to satisfy our demand for resources, are we really going to meet that by ruining the 4-5% that remains? That's one. And there are also other issues. So it's not that sand is unavailable in the general landscape. There are other rivers to close to the Chambal, including some of its tributaries like the Banas, neighboring catchments like the Kuwari, where there are illegal mines operational. Unfortunately, this sand might be cheaper in the market because there's no real investment. You're not paying the government any revenue. You're not depositing any fees. So it's a case of free for all, and anyone who has the wherewithal to get a tractor, employ somebody to do this, has access to free sand. And if you're going to dump freely mined sand, I'm sure you can sell it at a much cheaper rate. So that's what seems to be driving this, rather than actual demand for sand. And we hear a lot of arguments in terms of, see, India's a fast developing country. We need sand and all of that. But again, no one's given numbers. How did you determine what quantity of sand is required? And have you provided evidence that our legal sources of sand are unable to meet that requirement? No. So I haven't seen any of that. So I'm somehow unable to justify targeting protected areas, especially places like the Chambal, because it's so important for species like the Gharial and the red-crowned roof turtle. More than 80, 85, 90% of their global population is found in this one river. So are we not even able to protect these sites? And if that's the case, then I don't know. Are we so unable to keep up to our commitment to protect wildlife and natural habitats? So yeah, these are questions that come up to me. And we have again seen examples of or attempts in the past to allow mines in certain parts of the Chambal, arguing that some legal mining will help control illegal mining everywhere else. But that's not happened at all in the past. So they simply use receipts from legal mines to mine elsewhere. And it becomes impossible once it's left the river. It's impossible to tell what's legally mined sand versus what's illegally mined sand. So they're always able to get away. And it also makes it easier for enforcement agencies to not do anything about it, because now they're going to say that it's impossible to tell them apart. And yeah, it's hard to hold people or authorities to account in that sort of situation. And unfortunately, we've done that again.
Involved. Sorry, yes.
Exactly. Yes. And we've done that again. So last year, five sites have been denotified in the Chambal on the Madhya Pradesh side, with the same set of arguments, saying that we'll allow some legal mining to make sure we can have control elsewhere. And the counter to that is, if you claim that you have the wherewithal to monitor and prevent mining elsewhere, why not do it right away? Why wait to denotify certain parts? So these are things that come up every now and then. And even the argument that most of the sand now is to meet local demand. People have been mining these landscapes for 20 years. If the locals haven't met their demand, and sand is not, you're not going to build a house every year. So if you haven't been able to manage that in all this while, so that argument also doesn't really hold up to its claims.
So, Tarun, another question. There must be an ecological function in terms of disaster
Yes, absolutely.
management and stuff like that. What is it? Yeah.
In these sorts of rivers, the peninsular rivers, their course is more or less defined. So you don't see them changing course from year to year after large floods, because it's to do with the geography that they're flowing through. And so typically these large sand deposits are on the inner bend of the river. Okay, that's also where currents are much slower and deposition happens. And many of these large old nesting sites, these are deposits that have taken years, maybe even decades to form. These are high banks, and these sorts of sites are typically preferred by these species because they also offer a certain buffer in the monsoonal period. So if there's early rains prior to hatching or emergence, see, these sorts of nest sites can be protected versus low-lying nest sites. There's that. And rivers are thought to possess a certain energy, and water or flowing body of water not only has water but also carries a lot of sediment with it. And sediment is not fixed or it's not immovable like a rock, like a large rock or bedrock. So even sand is moving across time. So it's being carried downstream by currents and being replaced by what's coming from upstream. With excess mining or removal of sediment, many such rivers experience what is known as hungry waters, because so there's, because of excess removal of sediment from flowing waters, and with the amount of energy that's being carried, it tends to erode downstream areas. Sand deposits have that role as well, and they're also known to act as aquifers. They are like sponges, especially in the dry season, and they hold a lot of available groundwater. So without large sand deposits, you're going to lose groundwater too, and you're going to see faster surface runoff in those sorts of events. Yeah.
Now, so we were also thinking about how tourists and travelers, can also take part probably in not only conservation surveillance, which is important, but also in citizen science. Siddharth, would you want to discuss and tell us a little bit about the platform and how citizens, especially tourists, can also contribute towards it?
Thanks, Tyasa, and thanks everyone who's spoken before me. But I think the first thing I do want to start off with is that we talk about river systems, and this could be any river system in India. And the Ganga, I think, is the prime example of it, where we constantly hear 400 million people live in the Ganga basin, 600 million people live in the Ganga basin. But when it's time for action, all of our governance and a lot of the civil society action focuses on communities that live alongside the main stem of the Ganga, right? All the things that we are creating as 40 crore, 60 crore people is then stamped upon the few million or not even a million who live alongside the main stem of the Ganga. And I want to bring that to the Chambal as well, that we're talking about sand mining and sediments being extracted. And as rightly pointed out, there's lots of important points to discuss, but I think, the dream of trickle-down economics and the dream of equity that is absent from society today is what enables all of this activity to actually continue happening. And I'll want to sort of take you through India Sand Watch is a project that we've built at my organization, Vedatam. I forgot to introduce myself, but I'm the founder of Vedatam India Foundation, and I lead the India Sand Watch project. The India Sand Watch platform documents all of this through our own team, through partners, through volunteers, interns, collaborators, to try bringing this information into one platform. I'm not going to go into detail on the platform right now, but I'm going to illustrate the use of it through one example of the river Yamuna, which is going to be crucial as there are attempts to denotify the Chambal in the future. This is, each district is supposed to prepare a district survey report. This does not exist for the Chambal yet, or only recently has been created, because there was no legal mining activity. Wherever there is legal mining activity, each district has to create a report saying, in our district, these are the rivers in which there's some amount of sand available at such and such locations, and they have to list out those locations. And the auctioning of the mineral on those rivers can only happen within the identified areas, right? So this is also a report that we digitize on our platform and make available for people. And we also invite people to work with us on digitizing more and more. I want to show you this red circled area, and this is the location I'm going to focus on, in a village called Mandawar in Uttar Pradesh, in Shamli district, where it says that there's an area of 84 hectares where a large amount of mineral is available. And there are two sort of land records on which they're saying mining activity can happen. That's Gata number 621, 622. Those are two plots on which it can happen. And what's fascinating is the red circle is what the district survey report identified. And the red shape here, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, is actually what was auctioned. So it's absolutely illegal and it should have been struck down at the time that the tender was issued. And why I'm saying this is that we have the knowledge that this is what we can do as citizens. This is a contributor photo from that location, which says that, which shows clearly that mechanized equipment is being used, but the SEAC or the SIA terms of reference that was given out for the mining activity clearly says that you cannot use mechanized equipment for extraction. So this is illegal. So this is the citizen contributed image. The citizen contributed image also shows clearly that in-stream mining is happening again, which is illegal as per the minutes of the meeting from the State Environment Impact Assessment Authority. We're just talking pictures right here. And this is something that a lot of people do. They take pictures when they see something like this, no matter what their intention. We also have citizen images which show that night mining is happening. This is blanket illegal pan-India. There is no exceptions to this rule. If you see in-stream mining, if you see night mining anywhere in India, you should know it's illegal. And I'm saying you don't even need to know. If you see mining activity, just keep a record of it, where you saw it, when you saw it. This is a citizen sand mining observation. In fact, this is my team with Tarun, where we observe sand mining activity on the Chambal. In fact, this is exactly the site that Kunal was referring to of Tigra-Ritora, where mining activity was happening in very close proximity to where gharials were. And in fact, we don't have the time today, but we could also show you splendid visualizations Tarun has made of how huge this nesting site used to be and what remains of it. So if you have a observation of sand mining activity on any river of India, take the GPS coordinate of that location, take the date of observation. If you have additional notes, go to the Sandwatch platform, create a report yourself, or if you want to do it anonymously, the email address is here, sandwatch@vedatam.org. Just email it to us. Our team will create a report and we'll report back to you saying that we've done it. You don't have to also put your name on it, but we will have to independently verify that the information is correct.
But Siddharth, thank you so much for this introduction, because we often hear about things like the partnerships in conservation should be collaborative and constructive. And India Sandwatch actually is such a great example of that. So thank you, Siddharth, for introducing us to the platform. I just open it up to the panelists in general. How do we integrate this to, again, coming back to the point of, because we know the tourists do come to Chambal, even at a smaller scale, but they do come. And how can we sensitize them to such platforms?
Can I quickly respond to two bits? One is that the data on the platform is open access. Downloads will be enabled in the next couple of months. So then you can download all the data and you can combine it with eBird data or iNaturalist data. And then it's just like, poof, there's so much to do with that information. And the second thing is that we're also working on training kits for different kinds of actors on how they can use this. So lawyers, media professionals, citizens, civil society organizations, and administrators also. So if you are one of these, or just a common citizen, what is it that you can do and how can you leverage the platform? So just wanted to add that.
Yeah, great point again, Siddharth. Thanks. I'm just wondering whether, so basically when we know that the situation itself is a little sensitive, and whether we could actually advocate for contributing to something which reports the illegality that is going on in the locality itself. Yeah. So what do you think, Tarun, as well? And we'll come to Sahil after this.
Okay. Yeah, so I think to this reporting sand mining, maybe maybe have a bit of an advantage, because when researchers do so, forest departments, other authorities often are able to arm twist you because you're dependent on research permits to enter and work in that area, and which is not a constraint that tourists have. So yeah, it's often easier for them to report, and because they're mostly one-time visitors, it's hard to arm twist them into doing things or not reporting that.
So coming back, so at least when the travelers go to these places, do you think, because you're in a position to influence these travelers, not influence, maybe I'm just saying that, make them more aware, could we introduce them to these platforms like, India Sandwatch, and I'm sure many of them who are interested in birds would know about eBird and stuff. So
Yeah, that
in this,
can be done. A lot of people who are very passionate about what they see, they do mention that this is something that they feel very strongly about, and what can they do about it. So yeah, I mean, I'm happy to introduce them to some of these initiatives that people here have used, and then I leave it to them to decide how far they want to take it.
True. Yes, we can at least like spread the awareness and then hope that Sahil-like intervention can happen at some point. So the other thing is, Kunal, I wanted to ask is, is there a network of tour operators who also, take travelers to the Chambal River? And would it be, say, possible to kind of have a similar session with them and, say, Siddharth? And Tarun and all of us, and whoever is interested, to have the session where they can be told about, okay, this is the way in which this works, and just like an interaction session and an introduction to the platform, so that again the same thing that you said, you can at least like make them aware, and then it leave it to them. So do you think it's possible, and how many such tour operators operate in that area, and is there a network that we can reach out to, and stuff like that?
I think I think how Sahil came from Bharatpur, a lot of the guys who come from Bharatpur are basically through the guides and through the hotels over there. That's how a bulk of the guests come to Dholpur to do the bird watching and to see the skimmers. But then on the UP side, there are a couple of hotels who are running, and they organize their own safaris. I know them. I can introduce you to them. And then I think in Agra, there's one other person who's doing. Other than that, it's in our part of the area, there's very limited movement on the Chambal from a tourism point of view. But the Dholpur gets the maximum because it's close to Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary. So a lot of people come there. And these are the guides who are operating as tour operators, who bring them to Chambal and take them back to Bharatpur.
Okay, that's great then. So Tarun, would WCT and Siddharth, would Indian Sandwatch platform be interested in holding such a session with these sort of people who are bringing in travelers from outside to Chambal, and basically educate them so that they can educate others? Is that a possibility that we can think of?
Yes, I think definitely. We've already discussed doing workshops for, say, media persons in specific target groups. So, yeah, so we've been doing similar sessions with tour operators and basically informing how concerned tourists can contribute to these sorts of monitoring if they're interested. We can't force everyone to do it, but we can introduce them to these sorts of platforms. And even using Sahil as an example, and how somebody who came in as a tourist and just reported what they saw led to changes which nobody would have expected. So there's always that chance that somebody is reading, and people are reading it. And even if results are not immediate, you can document what's happening, and sometime or the other, this will be useful because it highlights that things are happening and people have seen it, and they've also reported it. So if the general public, if are able to see and observe and document all of this? Why aren't government institutions that are mandated to do exactly this? Why have they failed in doing it? So yeah, so it helps build these sorts of cases to eventually expect action either directly from administration or through judicial interventions. If you look at the brochures and pamphlets, they show you undisturbed, pristine looking habitats, but that's not at all what tourists get to see. So they are in some sense shortchanging people who they're charging for an experience that they claim to provide, but are simply unable to provide. So I think tourists can absolutely challenge state governments, saying that look at your brochure and look at the kind of pictures you promised to show us, and this is not what we get to see when we meet these places. And it also exposes as to how incompetent departments are, because see, tourism areas even within the Chambal are restricted. It's hardly 10% of the entire sanctuary, and even if these areas are not being able to, if they're not able to manage even what's visible to the entire world, you can imagine what's happening in places that are less accessible and where no one's keeping an eye. Yeah, so yeah, it highlights and exposes their incompetence in these matters.
True. True. Thanks, Tarun. Sahil, just wanted to come back to you so you were talking about how you are planning to write another follow-up, or you had mentioned something like this, and I assume that it was a follow-up article. Is it that, or are you still interested to, follow up with the illegal sand mining thing and be involved again? Could we have some?
No, I mean, yeah, now that Siddharth and Tarun mentioned that they can give me a list of more than 100 examples just to start off with. So I think another article must be written, something, I've considered writing a sort of long form piece on this, which really involves a lot more detail, because there's only so much you can do within, a word count of 800 or 1,000 words for a newspaper. So I've spoken to a few magazines in the past, and they were willing to give me space to, do a longer form. But for that, I'd actually have to go to the area, and I'd be more than happy to, connect with Siddharth, Tarun, even Kunal, and perhaps do a piece together. If that is something of interest, I'd be more than happy to be involved in that. Yeah.
So yeah, so thanks for this. Anybody wants to have a last word, please feel free.
Yeah, I think we should also encourage tourists to take pictures of what they actually see, because oftentimes you're looking for a perfect background to show an undisturbed habitat, and which we all do. But I think getting pictures of what the situation really is useful, especially in building these sorts of conservation stories, which can act as pressure points. Yeah, so I think people should be encouraged to take these kinds of pictures, and maybe a platform to upload this sort of imagery will be very useful.
Sahil and Kunal, both of you wanted to say something. Maybe Kunal, you go ahead and then Sahil.
That's actually it's a very relevant medium, I think, photography. But finding a platform to share some of these very disturbing images that can provoke emotions and also get people in trouble, especially if they're from the government agencies. It's not always easy for you to post something on, let's say, social media like Facebook or Instagram, because your identity is known. People don't want to do always. They don't want their identity to be revealed when they're posting photographs. So if you do think of a medium, maybe India Sandwatch, if they have a specific area where you can upload photographs without, again, with being anonymous, that could be definitely a medium for getting more people who come with these big lenses, and I'm sure they see these issues as well.
True. Actually, one of the things is because tourists are coming in from outside, maybe it will be a little difficult to actually trace them back and subject them to some sort of intimidation. Yeah, so that would be one thing, and the second thing is, of course, maintaining anonymity.
Yeah, so people have used imagery from here, and often social media stories and things of, especially tagging government agencies, have had impacts, especially now because they're quite sensitive to what's being seen, and all departments want to be seen as doing the good thing or the right thing. So they often, will do something about what's being shown or what's being discussed.
I hope that this will contribute to gharial conservation. And specifically, thank you, Tarun, for introducing us to all these other people who are interested in gharial conservation and in their own way are thinking about contributing to it, and giving us an opportunity to give them space and give you space to talk about it. Thanks everybody.